Russian Revolution was a bloody period of time, and it majorly altered the course of Russian history. The catalyst for this revolution was the Russo-Japanese War. At the time, Russia was an autocracy ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. There was a rigid social structure and strong anti-Semitic views, where Jews were forced into labor camps called pogroms. When Tsar Nicholas attempted to attack Japan, he was humiliated and lost bitterly, which had major repercussions for the Russian people. Serfs, the Russian lower class, went hungry as a result of his failure in Japan.
Oh man, now we're going broke, and I'm starving.
As a result of this food shortage, angry peasants protested in the Revolution of 1905. The Tsar had to tell his guards to use whatever means necessary to stop the revolt, which resulted in Bloody Sunday. Peasants were massacred by the Tsar, which only encouraged more revolts. Nicholas II, feeling pressured by serfs and his assistant, created the October Manifesto. It gave peasants more rights and essentially created a constitutional monarchy ran by the Duma. However, when the Tsar's assistant died, Nicholas revoked the October Manifesto and continued his autocratic rule.
Crazy.
When the Tsar came back into power, his wife, Tsarina Alexandra, became the puppet for a man named Gregory Rasputin. Rasputin claimed to heal the Tsarina's son, and thus gain major power over the Tsarina. However, his bluff was quickly realized and he was killed. Meanwhile, World War I was in full swing. The Central Powers, Austria-Hungary, and Germany fought against the Triple Entente, composed of Russia, Great Britain, and France. The Triple Entente was eventually able to win the war, with no thanks to Russia. During the war, the lower class's anger at the Tsar reached a boiling point.
Down with the autocracy! Down with... Stop! Come join us! Down with the autocracy!
Already upset about the revoking of the October Manifesto, the World War only made the serfs' anger worse. The lower class revolted against the Tsar, forcing him and his wife to step down. This revolt eventually led to the death of the Romanovs, and was known as the March 1917 Revolution. A constitutional monarchy led by the Duma was established in place of the monarchy. This provisional government was meant to be structured much in the same way as Great Britain, with Alexander Kerensky in the place of what would be the prime minister. However, the Duma was weak and lasted less than a year. In the end of the Romanov rule and the role of the provisional government, an extremist socialist movement based on the teachings of Karl Marx was growing. Led by Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky, the Soviet movement grew in Russia. The Soviet movement was made of the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. However, the Mensheviks were willing to cooperate with the Duma, but the Bolsheviks were the leading group of the Soviets, and both Lenin and Trotsky were Bolshevik. In November of 1917, the Soviets, who identified themselves as Red, revolted against the White Constitutional Democrats. This Russian Civil War was a major turning point in Russian history. The Bolsheviks wanted to remake the government and create a classless society, which Lenin explained in his April thesis. He also promised to end the war and redistribute land to the peasants. Their motto, peace, land, bread, and worker control of production, essentially summed up the Soviet program. Eventually, the Bolsheviks won the war, as the whites were unable to create a united front to defeat them. Lenin took over the government and began the start of a totalitarian rule in Russia.
One of Lenin's first acts was to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. This announced Russia's official resignation from the war effort, much to the benefit of the Central Powers. Germany was overjoyed that they didn't have to fight a two-front war, and completely supported the signing of the treaty. Lenin was also able to implement his strategy of war communism. Essentially, he nationalized most industries such as banks, forcibly took grain from peasants, and centralized the government. While this policy enabled the Bolsheviks to overcome some initial difficulties, it soon caused economic disruptions and hardships. As a result, the new economic policy was established. With the NEP, the state only allowed private ownership of land because the idea of collectivized farming was disliked. Essentially, he reverted back to capitalism to solve his country's economic problems.
I
I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. Two big ones. Two big ones. Hate you. Hate you.
Lenin also used the idea of revolutionary terror in his Cheka program, an early form of the KGB. And so, the story of the Russian Revolution is brought to a close with a new country standing in its place, the USSR.